Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Mira Blake waded into the swollen riverbank, her arms burning from exhaustion. Somewhere in the roaring current, a child was screaming for help. She spotted him clinging to a broken fence post, the water rising fast around his small body. Without a thought for her own safety, Mira plunged in, fighting the freezing current that pulled at her legs like claws. "Hold on," she shouted, her voice almost drowned by the storm. She reached him, wrapped her red scarf around his chest, and dragged him toward the muddy shore. When they finally collapsed on the grass, the boy gasped, "My dad, he is coming." Mira brushed his wet hair aside, trying to calm him until headlights cut through the rain. A black SUV screeched to a stop and a tall man rushed out, his face pale with fear. He dropped to his knees beside the boy, pulling him into his arms. "Leo," he whispered, trembling. Then he looked up at Mira, his dark suit soaked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You saved my son," he said, his voice raw, full of something between gratitude and guilt. Mira tried to stand but her legs gave out. The man caught her before she fell. "You are freezing," he murmured. "Please, get in the car." She wanted to protest, but exhaustion won. The next thing she remembered was the warmth of a hospital blanket and the steady beeping of a monitor. When she opened her eyes, the same man was sitting beside her bed, his sleeves rolled up, his watch gleaming under the fluorescent light. He looked nothing like the desperate father from the river. Now, he was composed, powerful, someone used to giving orders. "You are awake," he said quietly. "I am Ethan Ward. That boy you saved, he is my son." Mira tried to smile, still shivering. "He is safe. That is all that matters." Ethan's gaze softened. "You risked your life for a stranger. I will not forget that." She shook her head. "You do not owe me anything." But Ethan leaned closer, his tone suddenly firm. "Maybe I do. There is something you can help me with." A beat of silence filled the sterile room. Mira frowned. "Help you with what?" Ethan exhaled slowly, as if preparing for something absurd. "Be my wife," he said. Mira blinked, convinced she had misheard. "Excuse me?" Ethan's eyes did not waver. "A temporary arrangement. A legal contract. Nothing more." Her heart raced. "Why me?" His jaw tightened. "Because my son already trusts you. And because I cannot lose him." The rain outside the hospital window softened to a whisper as Mira stared at the stranger whose world was nothing like hers. She had jumped into a flood to save a life. She never imagined she would walk out of it with a marriage proposal that would change her own forever. For a long moment, Mira simply stared at him, unsure if she had truly heard what he said. "You want me to be your what?" she whispered, her voice still raspy from exhaustion. Ethan did not flinch. His tone was calm, almost businesslike, but his eyes revealed the tension beneath. "My wife. Temporarily. It is not what it sounds like. There are legal complications after my wife's death, and Leo's custody hearing is coming sooner than expected. My late wife's parents are fighting for him. They believe my lifestyle is too unstable for a child." He paused, his jaw tightening as if the words hurt to say. "I need to prove I can provide a stable family. They already adore you. You saved him. He calls you his angel." Mira blinked, still trying to process what she was hearing. "You barely know me, Mr. Ward. You do not even know my last name." "Blake," he said softly, surprising her. "I asked the nurse." "And what exactly are you asking of me, Mr. Ward?" To help me keep my son, he said simply. For 6 months. There will be a written agreement. You will be compensated generously. It is a transaction, not a marriage. The word transaction stung more than she expected. She looked away, the sound of the heart monitor filling the silence. You think you can buy everything, she murmured. Ethan leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Not everything. But I cannot lose him. Something in his voice, raw, desperate, almost human, made her chest tighten. Mira swallowed hard. And what if I say no? Then I will thank you for saving my son, he said quietly, and walk out of this room with one less chance to keep him. Hours later, as dawn broke over the gray city skyline, Mira sat alone by the hospital window, the red scarf folded neatly in her lap. The offer was absurd, unthinkable. But the image of Leo's frightened eyes refused to leave her mind. She had promised him he would be safe. And now, somehow, his safety depended on her again. 3 days later, she found herself standing in a glass-walled law office high above downtown. Ethan stood by the window in a charcoal suit, his back straight, his posture distant. The lawyer slid a folder toward her. Standard prenuptial and confidentiality agreement, he explained. Duration 6 months. Compensation $200,000. Mira blinked. That was more money than she could earn in 10 years as a rural teacher. Her throat felt tight. Ethan finally turned toward her, his tone softer than before. You will have your own space. There will be no expectations beyond appearances. You have my word. And Leo, she asked quietly. He just needs to believe we are a family. Mira took a long breath, her hand trembling as she picked up the pen. The ink touched paper with a small scratch. All right, she said. For 6 months, I will be your wife. Ethan nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if sealing a deal he wished he did not have to make. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking, and sunlight spilled faintly through the glass. When she left the office, a chauffeur opened the car door to a world that did not belong to her: marble floors, quiet halls, and a life she had only seen from a distance. Her heart pounded as she whispered to herself, 6 months, Mira. Just 6 months. But deep inside, she knew that nothing about this arrangement would remain simple. As the car pulled away, Ethan watched from the tower above, his reflection merging with the city lights. He told himself it was just a contract, but something about the woman who had risked her life for his son was already breaking the walls he had built around his heart. The first day inside Ethan Ward's mansion felt like stepping into another world. The walls were white marble, the ceilings tall and silent, and every corner seemed too perfect to touch. A maid showed Mira to her room on the east wing, spacious, spotless, and nothing like the small apartment she had left behind. On the bed lay a dress box, a handwritten note resting on top, for tonight. Mira hesitated before opening it. Inside was a soft ivory dress, simple but elegant, with matching shoes that looked far too expensive for someone like her. That evening, she walked down the grand staircase, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. Ethan was waiting near the fireplace, his suit perfectly pressed, his tie dark blue. He looked up when she entered, his gaze unreadable. You look appropriate, he said after a pause. It was not a compliment, not exactly, but she caught a flicker of something gentler in his eyes before he turned away. Our lawyer will arrive shortly with the official marriage certificate, he added. Mira nodded, her palms damp. So this is it. The beginning of 6 months. Ethan's lips twitched faintly. Yes. Rule number 1: keep appearances. Rule number 2: stay honest about everything else. And rule number 3, she asked, half curious, half defiant. He met her gaze. Do not fall in love with me. The words landed between them like a dare neither of them meant to speak aloud. A few hours later, under the soft glow of the chandelier, they signed their names on paper that made them husband and wife in the eyes of the law. No vows, no rings, just ink and silence. When the lawyer left, Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine. To practicality, he said. Mira raised her glass hesitantly. To temporary illusions. For a brief second, their eyes met, and both almost smiled. Days passed in quiet adjustment. Ethan's schedule was relentless, full of meetings and phone calls that stretched into the night. Mira spent most of her time with Leo, helping him with schoolwork, reading bedtime stories, and learning that behind his mischievous grin was a boy still haunted by loss. Sometimes Ethan would watch them from the doorway, expression softening before he turned away. One evening, Mira found him in his study surrounded by files and empty coffee cups. "You should rest," she said gently. "You are not sleeping enough." He looked up, weary but amused. "You sound like someone's wife already." She shrugged. "Only on paper, remember?" He leaned back, studying her. "On paper or not, you have managed to bring life back into this house." His words lingered longer than he intended, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. The mansion, once cold and distant, began to feel less like a cage and more like a fragile truce between two broken souls. Yet Mira could not ignore the whispers from the staff, the curious glances, the subtle reminders that she did not belong in his world. At dinner one night, a visiting investor smirked across the table. "So this is the new Mrs. Ward. Quite a change from the late Mrs. Ward, is it not?" The room froze. Mira set down her fork, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice remained calm. "You are right," she said evenly. "I could never replace her. Nor would I try. I am simply here to make sure Leo smiles again." The man's smirk faded, and even Ethan looked momentarily stunned. Afterward, as they stood in the dim hallway, Ethan spoke softly. "You handled that better than I ever could." "I handled it because I have been looked down on my entire life," she replied. "You learn to stay steady when others expect you to break." Ethan watched her for a long moment. "Then maybe I chose the right person after all." Mira turned away, hiding the warmth that crept into her chest. The deal was still a deal, but every passing day blurred the lines between what was written and what was real. And though neither dared to say it, both were beginning to feel the quiet danger of caring too much. Weeks turned into months, and the illusion of marriage slowly became part of Mira's daily life. The city mansion no longer felt like an unfamiliar palace. It had a rhythm now: morning breakfasts with Leo, quiet dinners with Ethan when his schedule allowed, and long afternoons filled with laughter that echoed faintly through the marble halls. One afternoon, Mira walked into the living room to find a team of stylists unpacking racks of gowns. "What is all this?" she asked, startled. Ethan appeared behind them, adjusting his cufflinks. "We have a charity gala next week. You will be accompanying me." Mira's eyes widened. "A gala?" "Ethan, I cannot." "You can," he interrupted gently. "It is part of the arrangement. The public needs to see us together." The stylist smiled reassuringly. "Do not worry, Mrs. Ward. We will take care of everything." Hours later, Mira stood in front of a mirror, transformed. The navy gown hugged her figure gracefully, her hair swept into soft waves. She barely recognized the woman staring back. That evening, Ethan saw her descending the grand staircase, and for the first time since their contract began, he forgot this was pretend. "You look," he started, then stopped, clearing his throat. "Appropriate, again," she teased lightly. His lips curved, a rare smile breaking through. "Perfect," he admitted. The gala was held at a downtown ballroom glittering with chandeliers and polished glass. Cameras flashed as they entered arm in arm, the crowd whispering. Ethan moved with practiced composure, greeting investors, shaking hands. Mira followed, smiling politely, trying to ignore the attention. But as the night unfolded, she found herself watching him: how he leaned closer when people spoke, how his laugh softened when he looked at Leo across the room. He was not the cold executive everyone described. He was a father trying to hold his world together. During dinner, a journalist turned to her suddenly. "Mrs. Ward, how did you and your husband meet?" The question froze her for a moment. Ethan's eyes met hers, a silent warning. Mira's lips curved into a faint smile. In the most unexpected way possible, she said smoothly. Sometimes fate arrives during a storm. The crowd laughed softly, moved by her poise. Ethan reached under the table and gave her hand a brief squeezy, a silent thank you. Later, when the music began, Ethan offered his hand. Dance with me, he said. Is this also part of the contract? She asked. Maybe, he murmured. Maybe not. They danced slowly, the lights dimmed to gold. For a few minutes, it did not matter that their marriage was fake. The warmth in his hand felt real, the way he looked at her felt real. But reality always finds its way back. As they left the floor, Ethan's sister-in-law approached with a sharp smile. You are doing a fine job, dear. Pretending, I mean. Everyone almost believes you are in love. Mira stiffened, but before she could respond, Ethan's tone cut through the tension. That is enough, Julia. The woman smirked and walked away. Mira turned to him, whispering, You do not have to defend me. Yes, I do, he said simply. Back in the car, silence stretched between them. The city lights flashed through the tinted windows, and Mira finally spoke. You warned me not to fall in love, remember? Ethan's hand tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Yes. She turned to the window, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you should stop being so kind. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the engine. Ethan glanced at her reflection in the glass, her eyes distant, the faint trace of sadness in her smile. He wanted to speak, to tell her something honest, but the words stayed locked inside. That night, long after Mira had gone to her room, Ethan stood alone in his study, staring at their framed photo from the gala. For the first time in years, the man who had built an empire felt completely powerless, not against rivals or contracts, but against the quiet pull of a woman who was never meant to stay. The morning after the gala, the house was unusually quiet. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting golden stripes across the marble floor. Mira walked into the kitchen to find Ethan already there, sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee. It was strange seeing him out of his usual suit and tie. Good morning, he said, his tone softer than usual. You handled yourself well last night. She poured a cup for herself, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. So did you. You even danced. Do not remind me, he said dryly, but there was warmth in his voice. For a brief moment, they were just two people sharing coffee, not a billionaire and a contract wife. But reality soon crept back. Ethan's phone buzzed, and his expression darkened as he read the message. Investors want a press interview about our marriage, he said quietly. They think a family image will strengthen our public trust. Mira blinked. An interview? As in, together? Yes. Tomorrow morning. He looked at her, a faint apology in his eyes. I would not ask if it were not necessary. She nodded slowly. I will be ready. The next day, the living room was transformed into a studio. Cameras, lights, and microphones filled the space that had once been calm. Mira sat beside Ethan on a velvet couch, the heat of the lamps making her palms sweat. The interviewer smiled brightly. Mr. and Mrs. Ward, people are inspired by your story. What is your secret to a strong marriage? Ethan hesitated. Mira glanced at him, then turned to the camera with a steady smile. Respect, she said. And remembering that love is not always loud, sometimes it is quiet, shown through patience and small acts of kindness. Ethan looked at her, surprised by how effortlessly she spoke, how she made their lies sound like truth. When the interview ended, the crew applauded. As soon as they left, Ethan exhaled, leaning back. You are very convincing, he murmured. Mira gave him a look. You should know. You taught me how to fake it. Maybe, he said. Or maybe you are just better at this than I am. That evening, Leo ran into the living room holding a handmade drawing. Look. It is us, he said proudly. The paper showed 3 stick figures under a red roof: Mom, Dad, and Leo, with the word home scrawled across the top. Ethan froze, emotion flickering across his face. Mira crouched beside the boy, tracing the lines gently. "It is perfect," she whispered. Ethan watched the two of them, something shifting deep inside him. Later that night, when Leo was asleep, he found Mira in the garden, barefoot on the grass, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You could have been anywhere," he said quietly. "Why did you agree to this life?" She looked up at the stars. "Because your son needed me. And maybe, because I needed to feel needed." He stepped closer. "You are more than that, Mira. You are the reason my house feels like a home again." The words caught her off guard. For a moment, she could not speak. Then she smiled faintly. "Careful, Ethan. That almost sounded real." "Maybe it is," he said, his voice low. The silence between them grew thick with something unspoken. But before either could take another step, the distant sound of a camera shutter broke the moment. Mira turned sharply, catching a glimpse of movement near the gate. A car door slammed, and whoever had been watching was gone. Ethan cursed under his breath. "The press," he muttered. "They must have followed us from the interview." Mira's chest tightened. "Ethan, if they publish something, I will handle it," he said, but his tone was grim. That night, sleep did not come easily for either of them. Somewhere between truth and pretense, a line had been crossed. And neither of them knew that the photograph taken in the dark garden would soon ignite the spark of a scandal that could tear their fragile world apart. The scandal broke 2 days later. Headlines splashed across every major news site: Ethan Ward's new wife exposed, a contract bride? The photograph taken in the garden was on every screen, the light catching Ethan's hand on Mira's shoulder, her expression tender, too genuine to deny. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, microphones in hand, shouting questions about their marriage. Inside, chaos reigned. Ethan's assistant handed him a tablet. "Sir, it is everywhere. They are claiming you paid her to play the perfect wife." Ethan's jaw clenched as he scrolled through the headlines. "Who leaked this?" "We do not know yet," the assistant said. "But it came from an anonymous source inside the company." Mira stood in the doorway, pale but calm. "They are right," she said quietly. "It was a contract." Ethan looked up sharply. "Not like they are saying." "It does not matter," she whispered. "To them, it will always look like you bought me." She turned and walked away before he could reply. Hours later, she found herself sitting by the window in her room, the city glowing faintly in the distance. The red scarf from the flood lay across her lap, a reminder of the moment that had begun it all. A knock sounded. Ethan stepped inside, his expression tired but resolute. "The board wants me to issue a statement," he said. "They are threatening to suspend my position until this is resolved." Mira met his eyes. "Then tell them the truth." He frowned. "Which truth? That I asked you to pretend to be my wife? That I fell for you somewhere along the way?" The admission slipped out before he could stop it. Mira froze, her breath catching. "Ethan," he shook his head, stepping closer. "I never meant for this to happen. But every day with you and Leo, it stopped feeling like a lie." "Do not," she said, her voice trembling. "Do not make it harder." "It already is," he murmured. The next morning, she woke to find the front page of every newspaper covered with a single photo: Ethan Ward standing at a podium, facing the press. "My marriage began as an arrangement," he had said, his voice steady but his eyes filled with something deeper. "But in pretending to be a husband, I learned what it actually means to love someone." The video went viral. Some called it a confession. Others called it a publicity stunt. But for Mira, watching it alone in her room, it felt like both a promise and a goodbye. Hours later, Ethan returned home to find her suitcase by the door. "You cannot leave now," he said firmly. "It is safer if I do," she replied softly. The world already hates me. If I stay, you lose everything. You are everything, he said quietly. Do not walk away. She smiled sadly. You told me not to fall in love. I did. That is my mistake, not yours. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Please take care of Leo. He needs you. And before he could stop her, she was gone, her red scarf trailing behind like a farewell in motion. That night, the house felt emptier than ever. Leo's laughter was gone, the halls echoing with silence. Ethan stood in the garden where it all began, staring at the spot where the photo had been taken. The same moonlight shimmered across the grass, but this time, it felt colder. He had built empires, negotiated millions, and survived every loss except this one. Meanwhile, across town, Mira walked alone under the rain, her small suitcase bumping against her leg. Every drop that fell reminded her of that first night in the flood, when saving a child had felt like destiny. Now it felt like heartbreak. She whispered to herself, 6 months. That was the deal. But deep down, she knew she had lost more than a contract. She had lost the only man who had ever made her believe in something real. Weeks passed, and winter crept across the city. The world had moved on from the scandal, but for Ethan Ward, nothing felt the same. His board reinstated him after a formal apology, yet his office felt emptier than ever. Every morning he caught himself glancing at the doorway, expecting Mira to walk in with Leo's drawings or a quiet smile. She never did. At night, the house echoed with silence. Leo asked less about her as the days went by, though he still kept her red scarf folded beside his bed. When is she coming back, Dad? He asked one night. Ethan swallowed hard before answering. Soon, he whispered, though he was no longer sure if that was true. Across town, Mira had returned to her old life in the small school she once taught at. The building was worn, the windows drafty, but the laughter of children filled the rooms with warmth. She buried herself in lesson plans and morning routines, pretending she had not left a piece of her heart behind. Sometimes, when she passed the mirror, she almost expected to see the woman from the Galath one who had worn silk and diamonds. But now it was just her again, the teacher with chalk on her hands and a quiet ache she could not name. One evening, as the rain began to fall, Mira received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a check made out to Brightwater Elementary Rebuild Fund and a note in familiar handwriting. It read, "Every child deserves a safe place to dream. Thank you for teaching me that. E.W." Her eyes blurred with tears. She folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at the signed divorce papers that had finally arrived. The 6-month contract had officially expired. He traced her signature with his thumb, feeling the sting of finality. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, the charity project you started in her name is completed. The school opens next month." Ethan nodded, his voice low. "Good. Make sure she gets the first invitation." He walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. Below, the city lights shimmered like reflections on water. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel everything he had buried: regret, longing, love. He whispered to the empty room, "I hope you are happy, Mira." Somewhere across the city, she looked out her own window at the same rain and whispered back, "I hope you are too." Neither of them knew it yet, but fate was not finished with their story. The river that had once brought them together was rising again, and this time, it would bring them face to face in a way that neither contract nor distance could undo. The morning of the school's grand reopening arrived with clear skies and sunlight that shimmered across the wet pavement. It had rained all night, the kind of soft, cleansing rain that left the world looking new. Mira stood outside the freshly painted building, watching the final touches being added to the sign that read, "The Brightwater Learning Center Project of the Ward Foundation." Her hands trembled slightly as she held the invitation Ethan had sent weeks earlier. She had almost thrown it away, but something in the simple handwriting, steady and familiar, had made her keep it. The courtyard filled with laughter as students and teachers gathered, excitement buzzing in the air. When a black car pulled up by the gate, conversations hushed. Ethan stepped out, dressed simply in a gray suit, no tie, his expression composed but his eyes searching. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the crowd. Months had passed since they last met, yet everything between them hung in that silence, every word left unsaid, every feeling denied. He approached slowly, the noise around them fading into background. "It looks incredible," he said quietly. "You did this," Mira replied, her voice steady though her heart raced. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You inspired it. I only made good on the promise you taught me to do the right thing, even when it costs something." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Then he pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, the same design as the one from their contract wedding, but this time, engraved with the word, forever. "There are no conditions this time," Ethan said, his tone firm yet gentle. "No signatures, no expiration dates. Just a choice. I am asking because I do not want to pretend anymore." Mira's eyes filled with tears as memories flooded back, the first night by the river, the laughter at the gala, the quiet mornings with Leo. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because I finally learned that love is not a deal you sign. It is a risk you take," he said softly. "And I am ready to take it, if you still are." The crowd's murmurs faded as she looked at him, the man she had once thought was untouchable now standing vulnerable before her. Then a small voice broke through the silence, Leo's voice. "Mom," he called, holding a bouquet of daisies. The word made Mira's heart ache and heal all at once. She knelt down, hugging the boy tightly, her tears falling into his hair. When she looked back up, Ethan was still there, waiting. She took a deep breath and reached for his hand. "No more contracts," she said softly. "Just truth." He smiled, relief flickering through his eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The crowd burst into applause, the sound mingling with the echo of the river nearby. It was no longer the flood that had nearly taken everything from them, it was the current that had carried them exactly where they were meant to be. And for the first time, their story did not feel like an arrangement, but a beginning. A year later, spring had returned to the city, carrying with it a softness that mirrored the peace inside Mira's heart. The school was thriving, filled with children's laughter and the hum of new beginnings. In the courtyard, colorful banners fluttered in the wind, announcing the first anniversary of the Brightwater Learning Center. Mira stood at the front steps, her hands lightly dusted with paint from helping Leo finish his banner. "You missed a spot," Ethan teased as he approached, his tie loosened, a familiar grin curving his lips. "You say that every time," she replied, smiling. "And yet, you always fix it," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. They stood side by side, watching Leo chase his friends across the playground, his laughter echoing through the spring air. "He is growing fast," Mira murmured. "Too fast," Ethan said softly. "But he is happy. That is all that matters." Mira turned to him, her gaze gentle. "You made that happen." Ethan shook his head. "We did. Together." A soft breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the kind that needed no words. Later that afternoon, a small ceremony was held in the school hall. Teachers, parents, and volunteers filled the room, their faces glowing with pride. Ethan took the stage briefly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "1 year ago, this place was only an idea," he said. "But one person believed it could be real. Mira Blake taught me that rebuilding is not about walls or funding, it is about people who refuse to give up." The audience erupted in applause. Mira felt her throat tighten as he turned to her, eyes warm. When the event ended, and the crowd drifted away, Ethan led her outside to the garden behind the school. The evening light turned the sky to gold. In the center of the garden stood a small stone plaque. Mira leaned closer to read the engraving, "For those who find love after the storm." Her breath caught. "You did this?" "We did," Ethan said quietly. "It is for us, for where we began." She smiled, her eyes glistening. You always know how to make me cry. Good tears, he murmured, brushing one away with his thumb. Then, in the fading light, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and red. It was her scarf, the same one she had used to save Leo all that time ago. You kept it, she whispered. I could never let it go, he said. It reminded me that sometimes the smallest act of courage changes everything. He wrapped the scarf gently around her shoulders, then kissed her forehead. Ready to go home? Always, she said. They walked hand in hand toward the car, the sound of Leo's laughter following them. As they drove away, the camera of the world they had built together lingered on the plaque, the wind carrying the faint echo of the river nearby. What began as a deal had become a promise. What started in the storm had turned into forever. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, their story finally felt complete, a testament that love, when chosen freely, is the only contract that never expires.